Our chair is so concerned about time that he's actually gone through my first slide, so that saves me. No, I'm delighted. It's very boring, but there they are. And the main point I want to emphasize is that the body I represent, the Secretariat on Responsible Conduct of Research, is based on a decision by these three disparate funding agencies that they really needed a common policy on responsible conduct of research. So I'm going to go over what they set their standards as, and I want to emphasize, because often what we hear is that the focus is on the health sciences or the biomedical area, and I know there's concern often from social scientists that everything is constructed not with their research in mind. So I want to emphasize that at least the attempt in Canada has been to formulate a policy that is responsive to all research disciplines. Whether we succeed is, a matter. I'm sure if there are Canadians in the audience, they can give their opinion on that. But that was certainly the intention. So I'm going to go through some key points about how we have set up our. I'm going to focus on the responsible conduct of research elements of what it is that the three agencies do. And I'm going to try and do it in a generic way. Obviously, I'm talking about the approach that we have taken, but I've tried to frame it in a way where you can see what the sort of key elements were that we were attempting to achieve. And everyone is trying to do, I think, similar things, of course, as has been mentioned, with different modalities. But here is the contribution that I think, with our powers as funding agencies, what is it that we can give to researchers and the research community more generally? And just these are the key elements, I think. So first of all, defining standards of what do you mean by responsible conduct of research? You can't hold people to account unless you tell them what it is you expect them to be accountable for. So I think that's the beginning. Making compliance with those standards mandatory is, voluntary standards are lovely, but we all know that at a certain point, if you cannot impose those standards or you cannot hold people to account in a way that has consequences, I think they are less successful. Due process to ensure that everyone gets a fair hearing, that people have an ability to come forward, an ability to express their concerns, and the respondent has an ability to answer to that in a way that is impartial, fair, and timely. Imposing consequences for noncompliance. Again, this is kind of the corollary. If you make it mandatory, there needs to be something more than, there needs to be some consequences. I think people need to understand that to take research integrity seriously, there must be consequences for not complying with those standards. And finally, as a funder, I think it's important not just to say, here's a rigid set of rules and we're going to slap you on the wrist or in the face if you don't comply with them, but also what else can we do to support you in compliance? And I think that's very important. So. You really have to be tough. So what are the standards? They're set out in our tri-agency framework on responsible conduct of research. This was a revision, a sort of major rethink and revision of policies that the agencies did have a set of standards prior to that that were common standards, but they were very, I would say, general, in some cases even vague and non-specific. And that's certainly sufficient for people who always do the right thing, but not really sufficient for people who may not know what the right thing is or choose not to do the right thing. So in this, we set out some clear objectives that include the reliability of the research record and a fair process for addressing allegations of research. And we set out what we thought of as the positive. Again, I want to emphasize, because this comes up again and again, the term research misconduct is found nowhere in our policy. You will not find the word research misconduct. What you find is a set of practices that we wish people to comply with, so things like scientific rigor, accurate record keeping, appropriate acknowledgement of authorship, responsible use of funds, and others. So we set out the positive attributes first, and then the reverse of those are what constitute breaches of our the integrity part of our policy. So if you do not use rigor, if you do not keep records properly, if you plagiarize or fabricate or falsify, all of those things are considered breaches, but so are any other elements of non-compliance with the positive obligations that you have. So we give you research funds, grant funds on certain terms and conditions. If you breach those terms and conditions, that too is a breach of responsible conduct of research. If you breach any of our other policies, whether it be on data management or the use of biohazards or animal care, or, quite importantly, for those who do work with human participants, we have an entire policy on the ethical conduct of research involving humans, and any breach of that. So, for example, doing research without appropriate informed consent, that too is a breach of responsible conduct of research. You know, the aim of this policy is to achieve responsible conduct of research, not to punish wrongdoing. That is not our primary aim. So just want to emphasize that. As a result of that approach, a breach may be either intentional or non-intentional. So we are concerned about researchers who do work not in compliance. We're concerned about that, whether it's deliberate or accidental or honest. So what is the problem there? There may be different problems that we need to address. Someone who does things wrong out of ignorance needs to be educated. Someone who does things wrong out of negligence needs to be reminded that they need to be more rigorous. Someone who does things wrong deliberately and repeatedly needs to be sanctioned and more seriously, clearly. So that's for the defined standards. And they're mandatory. How? Not through any legislative mandate. We don't have, the agencies as funders do not have the legislative authority to enact. These are not legal requirements. They're not regulatory requirements. But what we found in Canada at the federal level, because we don't always have appropriate legal levers to make things applicable to everyone, because not everything is within federal legal authority, but we found that making it dependent on funding is often a very effective method. So that's what we do. If you want our money, you follow our policies. And that is clear from the moment that you apply for our funding. The very first thing you will find on our application, actually now, is a consent to disclosure of your personal information in the event that you commit what amounts to a serious breach. So although privacy laws protect your personal information in general as a researcher, if you commit a serious breach, we are now able to publicize that because you've agreed to that as an initial term of being eligible to apply for our funding. And I want to point out that it's not only individual researchers that are bound by our policies, but the institutions that administer our funds are also bound by our policies. So ultimately for them, because I know there is often a concern that maybe institutions sweep things under the rug, if institutions don't follow the appropriate processes that we set out for them, ultimately the sanction for them, because we have oversight over them, is the removal of their eligibility to receive our funds. So it's mandatory, not just for researchers, but for institutions as well, and I think that points to how seriously we take responsible conduct of research. Due process. So if you're going to make this all mandatory and take it so seriously, what are the assurances that, that it will be done well? Oh, I'm going to speak more quickly now because I only have 3 minutes. So you have to identify a person at the institution to whom complaints can be made and who is responsible for handling the investigations. Appropriate timelines, although we allow for flexibility, but we do set out timelines and we do hold you to them. The appropriate expertise, and here I want to emphasize that investigating committees must have people not only who are familiar with the subject matter of the allegation, but also who understand the procedures. So often there is a lawyer or someone with legal expertise or someone who understands that. And independence, that is a lack of conflict of interest with respect to the parties involved, but also we require that there's institutional independence as well. At least one member of the investigating committee must be someone totally external to the institution. And we anonymize all the reports that are sent to us so that our own independent panel on responsible conduct of research, who reviews the institution's reports, has no idea from which institution it came or what are the names of the researchers involved. So that's how we try to assure impartiality. As I mentioned, there are consequences of noncompliance. They can be imposed either individually on the researcher or in cases of systemic noncompliance, they may be imposed on the institution, and they range from a friendly letter of education or an encouragement to take training to making you ineligible for funding for a period of time, and of course the most severe sanction we have is to render you ineligible permanently. Along with ineligibility for funding, we also deny people the ability to sit on peer review committees, so which I know some say that's a blessed relief, but in fact it is a sanction, of course, and a taking away of a prestigious role that researchers may have. And finally, as I mentioned, we like to support or feel that we need to support responsible conduct of research in other ways, through other policies. So, for example, we have a statement on principles of digital data management, which ensures that research data be preserved in a publicly accessible, secure, and curated repository. So there are other policies we have, as I mentioned, the ethics policy, that try to give clear guidance and support, and I hope accompanying education and facilitation so that researchers understand to what standards they're being held and are supported in whatever ways possible. So just to summarize, be clear about the expectations you have, ensure that there's due process in seeking compliance with those standards, do impose consequences, and ensure that your own policies are supportive of what you are expecting researchers to do. So I think I made it just under the limit.